Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gloria V. Fonseca Valoran. I am a CEW Academic Program Manager, and I coordinate the Women of Color in the Academy Project, which is a sister organization to the Women of Color Task Force. I'm excited to welcome you on behalf of the task force for our last afternoon session. Thank you for joining us. This has been an exciting day, but I also know it's been a long day for many of you. And so I'm excited to have you here for this last afternoon workshop. I'm committed to making sure that you walk away with a lot of tangible strategies and techniques before you leave for the week and the start of your weekend. So I'd like to say that I'm also a task force member. I'm also a former executive member. As I mentioned, like you, I hold many roles, many of you. I'm also a doctoral student in the School of Education, and I'm on my last step of finishing my PhD program. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about and introducing the workshop and the development of the workshop, as well as giving you an overview about, I'm sorry, let me switch my slides. Can everyone see? Let me try this again. Can you see now? Yes. Okay. So I want to thank your patience we are doing a webinar format, and this I'm not as comfortable doing. I'm used to doing the meeting where I can see your faces. So please feel free to use the Q&A if you have any questions that come up even before I ask for Q&A. We're going to try our hardest to make sure that this is engaging. But I also encourage you to stay connected with Task Force if you want to see a part 2 where we do some more discussion focused to this workshop. So first and foremost, this is a foundational workshop, and our goal is to be able to offer you a mindfulness approach, in thinking about goal setting and planning. We will also offer structured time to begin planning and organizing. We're going to give you some tips and strategies so you can think about continuing this deeper process, and as well as connecting to tips and strategies. And I appreciate you bearing with me as I'm moving between screens as we're doing this virtually. So quick for virtual housekeeping, I want to make sure you all know that there's a live transcript available if you need to access it. There should be a link at the very top of your screen right now if you want to access it. If you are leaving early, I want to make sure I remind you that we will be sending out the slides for this workshop after you've completed your evaluation for the workshop as well. And then I also want to encourage you to share at your level of comfortability. I will be asking questions and encouraging you to share it in the Q&A prompt area. And you can share as much or as little as you would like. Okay. The other thing I want to do before I move on and jump into the workshop is thank those people who are supporting the workshop. Lisa Fields, who is going to be our chat monitor here and also a task force member. Thank you. Mary Jo Gray, who's also assisting with the chat monitor. And Kara Thompson, thank you for being our IT support. We could not do this without the multiple people working together. So thank you. All right, so let's jump into this. I'd like to give you a minute just to look at these images. And I apologize, I forgot to mention something in my beginning of my introduction. Morgan Williams, who was our academic program assistant at CEW Plus and who has recently graduated with her master's, helped to create this workshop. And she would have loved to have joined us, but unfortunately has a full-time job right now and was unable to get some time off. But she sends her regards, and I want to make sure I make note of her and her contribution to this workshop. So I invite any reactions in the Q&A box. So Mary Jo and Lisa, if you want to let me know, any reactions to these images? Feel free to share. One of the things I wanted to say about this is that this workshop was created particularly for the academic coaching program for our student caregivers. And the intent behind creating something like this was about how do we help individuals who are managing multiple roles and multiple identities and tasks that are important to them? How do they manage their day-to-day lives so they can actually be doing the things that they're really invested in doing? Because the reality is most of us are trying to do so many things at once. A lot of us wake up in the morning and we are thinking about tasks, and we go to sleep thinking about tasks, right?
So Glory V, so far folks are saying, I'm always doing so many things and never really focusing on me. Looks like life. I can relate. I wish I had more arms. Multitasking, busy. I'm overwhelmed just looking at the images. It's a
Thank
very
you.
accurate depiction of how we have to have multiple roles within our life and trying to find balance within those roles.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I credit Morgan Williams because she found these images. And you're right. You walk away going, most of us spend our lives acting as if we have 10 arms and 10 legs when we don't, right? And time isn't infinite, unfortunately. Time is indiscriminate. We all have the same amount of time, right? And so I think this idea of mindfulness is so important as we think about individuals like ourselves who are so committed to our work, committed to our families and our communities. How do we manage? And a key word throughout this whole day has been around self-care and wellness, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that today. So I'd like to see if I can make sure this is working. I'd like to do a little bit of introduction to myself and how I enter this conversation, which I'm going to ask the same of you to do as well. So I'd like to begin by sharing that I have spent 11 years working on my PhD. That is 5 years extra than most individuals in PhD programs. And with that comes a lot of shame and anxiety. And unfortunately, halfway through my program, my anxiety was so debilitating that it stopped me from actually doing anything. And my go-to, because I'm kind of a procrastinator in parts of my life already, and in other parts of my life, I'm super organized. My go-to movement is to become a possum. I just pretend dead. Now, this is just a pretending dead of a possum. I just want to point that out. I just don't move. And the other thing I do is like a turtle, I hide. When my anxiety and stress is so high, I won't do anything. And so without movement, there is no action, right? And so this led me to really seeking out other strategies to take care of myself in order to still move forward. And I want to point out that I'm doing my dissertation and my PhD at the University of Michigan. This is a highly competitive environment, right? And unfortunately, my whole academic and educational career has been in historically white institutions. So that means that in addition to the regular kind of nuances of life and managing, I'm also managing the climate and culture that I'm experiencing, which hasn't always been positive. And so that aids in my anxiety and stress, or contributes to it, which makes it hard for me to focus and to be what U of M always says, productive, right? And so now I even have an adverse reaction to the word productive. Anybody else have any adverse reactions to the word productive? I want to see if I'm alone out there. So today we're going to kind of transform that, right? And I think part of my journey was taking control of what I had in terms of agency. So some of culture and climate and the things I was experiencing around policy was around systematic issues, right? But there is some extent to which I can control. And a lot of that is how I react or respond to situations, right? So this is what led me in my journey to meditation. It is part of my own daily practice, and I'm excited to talk with you about it more and how I think it can aid in our own kind of self-awareness and ways of grounding ourselves, especially individuals who are marginalized, who have multiple roles and identities that they're trying to imagine, that they're all really important to them. This to me is like the secret, right? So I'm excited to share more about this. I'd like to play a video for you just to introduce this notion of what is mindfulness. And I'm going to use the word mindfulness for this workshop interchangeably with awareness, right? So let me stop sharing for just a moment. Now I'm going to show a video that's only 2 minutes long. And I think this is a great it's a great description of what is mindfulness, but I think it's done very visually well. There we go. And I'll listen to some, if I hear Mary Jo or Lisa tell me they can't see it, please let me know. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and play.
You're gonna have to stop and then share the sound again.
You may have heard this.
Oh, thank you. Let's try this again.
Word mindfulness. It's become something.
1 second. Here we go. Second time's a charm. Share screen. Better?
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
Give me 1 second while I transition back to the slides. Here we go. All right, so I'm hoping the slides are loading on your page and you're back to the website. Okay, so that video was from Happify. It's actually, I'm not sure if you recognize the voice, but that actually is news anchor Dan Harris. And actually, he created Happify after he had a major anxiety panic attack on the news. I'm not sure if anybody knows about the story. And he shares this about he was running himself down every day until literally he had an on-air attack. And that's what led him to thinking about mindfulness. And so I think it's a great YouTube resource. I think it's a great resource to check out. There's also another link here that I would encourage you to think about checking out. Also from Big Think about how attention, when you think about mindfulness, dissolving your thoughts, but it allows you to have more of a focused attention. So let's talk a little bit more about that. When I think of mindfulness, I like to think of it as I'm in a movie theater, I'm by myself, and I'm looking at the stage and I'm just observing my feelings and thoughts. And my goal is to not react to them, right? It is to use my more conscious brain, my more thoughtful brain, and just to be aware of them, right? And to not allow my feelings and thoughts to drive every single thing I do, right? And at the worst time of my life, when anxiety was the worst, that was what was driving my life. And mindfulness in particular, practicing mindfulness through meditation allowed me to kind of reclaim some of that control, right? To be ultimately more organized and move towards my goals, which was finishing my dissertation. So I'd like to just take a moment to just recognize something really important. I agree with Dan Harris in that this is a major new movement in the United States in terms of mindfulness and awareness. It's become a hot topic too, a term that we use. And I would say that this is very similar to the wellness movement in the 60s. But it's important to know that I'm happy for this movement. It's important to recognize that there are communities and countries that have been practicing awareness through meditation for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? We are just new to this. And so I think it's really important for me to begin with that acknowledgement before moving forward. And so now I want to open it up and get some feedback from you all. What is your entry into mindfulness or meditation? Because we may have a variety of people here that actually practice meditation or mindfulness practices. So I encourage you to put in the chat box, what's your entry into mindfulness? Are you new to it? Is this something that you are attempting to try, or something you've been practicing for quite some time? So it'd be nice to hear that from you. And I'll look to Mary Jo and Lisa.
So far, we're getting yoga.
Yes. Yes. Yoga is a really great way of practicing awareness. Yeah.
Anyone else? Feel free to put your answers in the Q&A.
Anyway,
I meditated for a long time, but I was very focused on keeping my streak on meditation. So she was looking at the meditation app versus doing it for herself.
Yeah. Yeah, I will admit, I actually started off with meditation using an application myself. And it got to a point where I had to move away from it. And we'll talk a little bit about, and today you will walk away thinking about what is a simple way for you to start meditating, for you to start being mindful and practice.
So several people, meditation, somebody else said exercise. Another person uses the Calm app, somebody else, culture and upbringing, and still more yoga.
Yes.
Oh, this is an interesting one. I've started to focus on enhancing my empathy, looking outside of my circumstances.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate all those comments. One of the things I hear often when we're doing this, especially in the coaching sessions that I have, is that people will say, well, I try, but I don't actually make it an actual habit. And I want to make sure I tell those people who are out there. So for those of you who are doing this, congratulations. I encourage you to go deeper with it. For those of you who are to hear for the first time, welcome. You'll walk away with some strategies. And for those of you who are in the middle, which often what I get, those who try, who can't make it a pattern, I want to point out that trying is action and it counts. Okay. So let me just rephrase. Let me just kind of talk about practicing mindfulness, practicing awareness. One of the major things of why I want to think about this is that our feelings and thoughts are not always based on truth or evidence or even facts, right? And they don't always serve us well. And they often lead to more of being overwhelmed, anxiety, and stress. And it clouds our clarity and our logical thinking, which is what we need when we're thinking about goal setting and planning, right? Mindfulness is a way that provides us a way to relate to our feelings and thoughts which directly impact our behavior and changing patterns, right? So for any of you who are here who is like, I want to change my pattern, I want to do something different, or I want to work on this goal that I've never gotten to, it's changing a pattern. And that is tough, right? But know that you're not alone. There are lots of resources here. And if it's tough, that means you're supposed to be doing it, right? So you practice mindfulness through meditation. And the most simplest way and the most effective way is usually focusing on your breath. right? That's why a lot of people talked about yoga, right? Because you have to focus on your breathing in your body. And so I encourage you here right now, what we're going to do is I'm going to take a look a minute at, yeah, we're going to practice a little bit of breathing exercises in just a few minutes, okay? But if there are any Q&A, any questions, please feel free to add those into the box. So why consider mindfulness approach when you're thinking about planning and organizing and goal setting? Because it is the most energy efficient way of doing things. So I'm going to read this quote, and it's by Dr. Joel Levy. He's the co-founder of Wisdom at Work, has a lot of great information online. And I believe he's a psychologist in training. So being mindfully focused is actually more energy efficient state of living and working, and can help you see more clearly the roles that stress and time management play in your life. A little bit of energy that you invest in staying mindful is far less all the energy you burn up in tension and distraction of ordinary mindless living, right? And I would argue, if I were to add to this quote, I would say that the little bit of energy you spend being mindful and being aware and thinking before jumping in is a lot less of the energy you spend dealing with the anxiety and overwhelmness feelings. And that was the case for me. So benefits of thinking about mindfulness and goal setting and planning. You get a deeper knowledge about yourself, right? All of us need a little bit more reconnection with ourselves. And we heard that in the responses back. And I think when you're thinking about this as it relates to planning and goal, and I'm speaking to anybody in terms of your own individual kind of goals that you have for yourself, anybody who leads teams, who works directly with students and supervises, I encourage you to think about these practices and these strategies in those spaces as well. Because when you think about knowledge about yourself, what you're also learning is how you work and how you work effectively, right? How long does it take you to complete a task or a project or learn something new, right? Or making progress even when you're stuck or overwhelmed. And that's the space where I live in with most students with coaching, right? Because we are all highly successful, which is why we're here. And so it's thinking about how we take what we've learned already and what patterns we have and how we can transform those, right? Lower your stress level, anxiety while moving towards your goal. But more importantly, it allows you to enjoy downtime and fun without feeling guilt, right? So let's do a little bit of practicing mindfulness. So the first strategy I'm going to call is called the pulse check, right? So I want you to consider how you're entering this conversation around planning today, right? Using the Q&A box. You can ignore the image, but you can choose some words or phrases that represent how you feel at this very moment about your process for setting goals, prioritizing, or organizing yourself. And so one of the things I encourage you to do, you're welcome to start responding, but I encourage you to practice this idea of breathing. So for those of you who are new, I know this will feel familiar, but for those of you who are new to this might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but really what you want to do, and for some people it's easier to close your eyes, but I encourage you to take 3 deep breaths before you respond. And as you're taking in your breath, it's the most simplest way to me to be mindful. All I'm trying to do is just focus on what it feels like to inhale and exhale. And I'm aware of the thoughts that are running through my mind, but I'm not reacting or responding to them.
So you're saying right at this very moment, inhale, exhale, and tell us how you feel.
Yes.
You ready for the answers?
Yes, I am.
Somewhat anxious, thinking of my to-do list and deadlines for the next week. Calm, Scattered, overwhelmed, but hopeful, exhausted, overwhelmed. I'm seeing a lot of overwhelmed people.
Okay.
And that's about right, right?
Yep.
Ah, there is nowhere else I need to be or need to do. I love that.
Yes. Thank you again for sharing, everyone. I know how this format can feel a little bit disconnected, so thank you.
Some people are finding it difficult to focus. Huh. I like this one too. Guilty for not multitasking.
We can talk about that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, let's take that one. That's a really great one to hone into what we're going to do next. This idea of multitasking comes up a lot, and people actually seek me out and see other CW counselors because they want to be better at multitasking. I don't know if anybody knows Dr. Jackie Bowman, who is our ombudsman, the director of the ombudsman office. She used to be a CW counselor here and was my counselor during the most toughest time of my life. And one of the major things she told me that transformed my life was she said, you can't multitask. No one can really multitask. Cognitively, we are not set up to really multitask. And I believe mindfulness and awareness reminds us of that, right? And I want to be really clear. Think about the tasks that we do in a day. It's either making lunch for your child, scheduling an appointment for your partner, heading to work, leading meetings, right? Trying to be attentive in a meeting and contribute where it makes sense to somebody else, deal with technology issues. This is a lot of cognitive work, right? And we are constantly switching in between things all the time. But how aware are we of that? How mindful are we of that? And do we allow our bodies and our minds time to transition to these different tasks? That is what we are talking about today. So thank you, because the reality is we cannot really multitask cognitively, and not well, I want to say.
Some people are saying they feel calm in the moment. Inhale, exhale. Oh, I feel calm. But as soon as you stop doing the deep breathing exercises, the anxiety and stress comes right back at them.
Yeah. Yeah. That happens for me as well. And so I just want to point this out. Part of the pulse check is allowing me to tap into how anxious am I today, right? What is my stress level today, right? And so I think what I encourage people to do is what I tend to do is when I'm breathing my 3 deep breaths and I can pick up that my anxiety is pretty high and my stress level is pretty high, I continue with the breathing. And I continue with it and I try to slow it down as much as possible. And sometimes I will do that for a full minute. Sometimes I will do that for 2 minutes. And I will say this, it does not mean it's going to take away all of your anxiety and stress. It's just going to allow you to be aware of it and try to find a way to transform what you need to do to get done to the day. So my advice, keep breathing. Take that minute or 2 minutes, right? Another piece of advice, and I'll talk about this later, in terms of how I focus on the breathing, I often touch my body as a way of reconnecting with myself. It's called a compassionate pause. I do it throughout the day sometimes when my stress level is pretty high. I just touch a part of my body that I feel comfortable, and I do my deep breathing in that way as well. We will keep talking about strategies. Was there anything else we wanted to point out in terms of comments, Mary Jo or Lisa?
These are really so very good. That, you're a different person. You can be very organized at work. And when it comes to your personal life, maybe not so organized, or being good at organization, but then it's the pressure of execution that gives you anxiety. Like I can put it all down on paper, but then when it comes to actually getting it done, now I become an anxious mess.
Yes. Yes. You're hearing me say yes, and I apologize because I know you have feelings related to what you are articulating. So I apologize, but I'm saying yes because I understand that feeling. And I would say probably anybody on this call probably understands that feeling of either being able to write task lists but not execute. Part of what you are doing is you're being aware of your own process. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today is your process, right? And then how we can implement strategies to move forward. Okay, let me introduce something now. This is a figure. And so again, I want to point out, this is a visual representation of what, and this is something that Morgan put together as we've talked about this several times with different groups of individuals, students and staff. We thought a visual representation would be helpful for thinking about the mindfulness process we want you to consider, right? I'm going to walk through this figure, but I encourage you to ask any questions. I encourage you to even put your reactions to this. But I want to point out something in that while this is a cyclical cycle, it is not linear. It's only for visual representation. We put it in this format. So when we think about this, awareness and reflection, if you were to begin here, but you don't have to, you would begin in awareness and reflection. But you want to continue this between each of these steps, right? And so to us, after you begin with awareness and reflection, that means how are you entering whatever you are doing? The task list, if you're entering work, just being aware of how you're feeling. What's your energy level like today, right? What do you have on your plate? Just being aware of your thoughts and feelings. And so for this, I would do a 1 minute or 2 minute kind of breathing exercise, right? Then you want to begin with the brain dump. Many of you may have heard this called a mind dump before. And so this is where you are actually allowing your brain to release everything that you are keeping, right? So many of us have projects in our heads, have emails we've written already in our heads, have a task list where you have to give to your children or family members. We have all this stuff in our heads. The brain dump to me is so critical in being able to release some of that space in your head cognitively, right? And to be able to get it out on paper. And the critical part of the brain dump is to understand there are multiple steps in a brain dump. But the first initial step is brain dumping with no judgment and not trying to react or organize or anything. You're just trying to dump it out, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what the brain dump is versus a task list. And if I forget to say that, please remind me. Then we move into, after you brain dump, and we'll talk a little bit about that, you think about the way that you can organize and document the goals and priorities that have come up from that brain dump, right? Then we shift to prioritizing goals, right? What is most important, what needs to get done? And then identifying the tasks needed to accomplish those goals and priorities. And then specifying the effort level needed. And so I would say that the majority of people are very great with creating task lists. And they often assume that that's the same thing as a brain dump, but we'll talk a little bit about that. What they often have tough time with is prioritizing and specifying effort level, right? So one of the things I want to point out is that most often when we see people for coaching, what we are seeing are people who are highly active, highly productive, but they're overwhelmed. And I say that they're productive, meaning that when they start their day, they are jumping right into their tasks, right? And they are moving along their task list. I would argue that there's a step that happens before you jump in. And that's the awareness and reflection and the brain dump. So we're going to practice a little bit of that today, the brain dump. But now I encourage any reactions, comments to this visual representation. I encourage you to think about your own process. Where do you end up kind of focusing most of your attention? Where are you really good? What steps are you really good at? What steps do you need more support? Feel free to include this in the Q&A.
Question, is this something you recommend doing every day?
Oh, that's a great question. So this is actually a reflection of a process. So I would not say that this whole process should happen every day. What I do think should happen every day, in all honesty, is brain dumping. So one step in this process. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Please feel free to follow up. That was a great question.
Is the brain dump temporary, pausing thoughts to come back to later?
Yes. Brain dump can definitely be things you want to get down and you don't want to forget about it and you want to come back to it. Yes. So let's jump into that. If there's no more Q&A, I'll move to the next slide.
Oh, hold on one second. As an action-oriented person, this is a great reminder to reflect before starting to do a task. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's completely accurate. So I think, and this is why I go back to my own experience as a student here. There's this huge term like, how productive were you today? I got that question every single day, multiple times in a day for 10 years, 11 years straight. It has left a toll on me, right? And so to me, when I think of it, I think that question always pushed me to wake up in the morning and just start working without actually being thoughtful about how I was working, right? Or my energy level that day, what I had going on the rest of my life that doesn't stop, right? Just because I'm at school or I'm at work. So yes.
Oh, continue, Glory B. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I just wanted to check. So let's go ahead and start. Let's do an activity on brain dumping today, right? I want you all to bring your stuff with you today. So let's get some of this out. So before we go into our brain dump activity, and I'm going to give you just 2 questions to consider, and then I'm going to ask you to find something that you can use to write on. It can be electronic, it can be a piece of paper, whatever you want, but anything that allows you to feel free and not restricted, right? Now, before we do this brain dump, I want to try affirmations, right? So I'm talking today, throughout the day, we're going to be doing these different strategies that I utilize in order to help myself focus and get my awareness pretty quickly. So these are things I can do in less than a minute, sometimes less 5 minutes, right? So we're going to do affirmations. And affirmations, if anybody has heard of them, it's just a positive statement that you say to yourself. And so I use affirmations as I'm breathing, right? As I'm focusing on my breath. So I encourage you, I want to offer this affirmation. It's something that I keep all over my house right now to help me get to this finish line. What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? So I encourage you, because we're in a webinar format, and so I'm depending on where you're located, I encourage you to say this out loud as you are taking in your 3 deep breaths, okay? And before you start your brain dump, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? And actually, Mary Jo, can we put this in the chat, in the Q&A box so people can remember it as I switch slides?
Sure.
Okay. I apologize. I could not find who actually says this quote, but it's available in lots of different cards. Once I track it down, or if anybody knows, please let me know. Could have been multiple people who said it too. Okay. So our first brain dump activity can take us about 10 minutes in total. Ooh, hold on a second. Here we go. So we're going to do the first activity is part A, right? There's 1A. It's going to be 3 to 4 minutes. We're going to do a brain dump. That means with no focus. I want you to just, whatever is on your mind right now, get it on paper. And don't try to react, organize, or anything to it. Let it out as raw as possible. And so here are the 2 questions that I ask you to consider. What do you have on your mind right now? What have you been avoiding or pushing aside? Okay? And keep in mind, 3 deep breaths with the affirmation. What would I attempt to do if I knew I could not fail? So I'm going to start the timer. I'll set it for 3 minutes. And then I encourage you to do your 3 deep breaths, your affirmations out loud, and then begin your brain dump. Okay, let's begin. All right, so take a moment, take a 3 deep breaths in, take a look at what you've dumped already. If you're working on a sheet of paper or a whiteboard, put a line down the middle because we're gonna do another brain dump, okay? But before we do that, because we're already 40 minutes into this workshop, I wanna encourage you to stretch your arms above your head if you can. If you want to get up and stretch your arms, definitely try to get your hands above your head. Why? Because it moves circulation and helps to move that blood through your body, right? So even if you can't stand up, put your hands above your head, give yourself an eyeball break for just a minute before we move on to the second brain dump. So I'll give each other, we'll go at 2:46, okay? So I'll give everybody a 2-minute break. I'll check to see if there are any Q&As. Mary Jo and Lisa, were there any questions I want to keep in mind that came up?
Not questions.
Okay.
But a reminder, folks, raising your hand isn't really going to work. So you'll have to type a question into chat. If it's a question that you don't want everybody else to know about, say that and we'll answer it privately. Okay?
Yes. Thank you, Mary Jo. Okay, we'll resume in just 1 minute. We're going to start our second brain dump. So again, if you haven't, put your hands above your head.
Here's one question. I struggle with the difference between a brain dump and a task list. How do we distinguish between those two things?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. So if I don't come back to it, please remind me. Yes, that's a great question. I should have a slide on that next time. I'm going to do that. Okay, so we'll be starting in just a few seconds on our second brain dump. And then I'm going to make sure I answer that question about what is the difference between a brain dump and a task list. Oops, okay, let me close this out. All right, let's begin again. Another brain dump, but there's a difference this time. This time we're going to do it with a focus, right? So you are going to try to focus your energy and attention on the brain dump of what, specifically on your goals and desires. So what do I want more of in my life? Academically, professionally, personally? What do I want? Where do I want to put my energy and focus? What are my goals and priorities? What do I should have said, what do I desire most in my life right now or in the future? Again, I'm going to encourage you to do 2 steps in this process. I'm going to encourage you to use your focusing on your breathing, 3 deep breaths in. When I say deep, you just want to have it controlled, and hopefully your stomach will expand and contract as you're breathing. And you want to focus on the affirmation, what would I do if I knew I could not fail? So I just had to change that, right? What would I do if I knew I could not fail? Okay. And now this brain dump will be focused on your goals and desires. And again, remember to just be aware of your thoughts and reactions. If you need to refocus your attention, then do that. That's perfectly fine. So we'll do 3 minutes again, starting now. Begin your brain dump with the focus on goals and desires. I want to congratulate you all who participated in both brain dumps. That's a lot to do. I hope you can see, what I'm hoping you can see from this 3-minute exercise is how much you can, how quickly you can practice awareness and reflection in your planning as well. So here are the questions, the wrap up. These are the questions that I would normally have for part 2 of this exercise, but I'd like to open it up for a larger group discussion, given the timing, if that's okay. So one of the things I want you to think about is look at your brain dump, your first brain dump and your second brain dump. I want you to consider, do you have more to dump after you've done this exercise? Do you notice anything between your first and second brain dump? Right? Was it more focused? Were you able to focus more? Did you see anything that emerged in terms of goals or priorities or a pattern of your thinking? So those are some questions I'd like to open up for the larger group. Feel free to respond in the chat box.
In the Q&A, and Mary Jo will read it.
In the Q&A, thank you. I keep saying chat box. The other question I want to throw out there, because it'll lead into our thing, is did you create a task list?
So looks like the first dump was more of a to-do list. The second list was more my values and my picture priorities. The second was more fun.
Wow, good. I love when I hear that. That's the goal, in all honesty.
There are items on the first list that will allow the things on the second list to happen.
Ah.
The first dump felt more negative. And I guess that goes along with the task, with the idea of a task, right?
Being a task, right.
Right, and the second dump is more positive.
Yeah.
One person says, you definitely have more to dump.
Yep, okay.
And felt like they were racing the timer. It was very helpful because at least some of it is on paper, not cluttering up their brain.
That's the goal, yes.
First brain dump was more negative, focused on a lot of things that caused anxiety in that very moment. The second brain dump was very positive and focused on the future.
So let me take a moment, because I think this taps into that great question that was asked about, is a brain dump a task list? I'm gonna be very honest. Most people that I work with, and this is true for me, when I have a lot on my plate, I can easily make a task list, but that task list freaks me out. And then I end up being less productive within that next hour. And that's true across the board. Of the studies that I've looked at in terms of organizational management and team building, that's often the case, that people's productivity goes down after they create task lists, right? Now, you could be somebody who actually really thrives with task lists, and that's not the case for you. But I would say a lot of people that I see, that's usually the case, and that's true for me. So that's the difference between a brain dump and a task list. The brain dump should make you feel motivated. It should make you feel like you have some agency and some control of what you're doing. And I would argue that that's why it's important to do multiple brain dumps, because most often our first brain dump is just what we have to get done. I got to go buy groceries. I got to go do this. I got to go do that. They're usually just tasks. And so you need time cognitively to get all that out and just kind of keep moving and keep brainstorming, right? So multiple brain dumps are needed to get to that space where you're actually looking at goals and priorities, right? We as humans think in tasks, right? And I think it's easiest for us to break down things into smaller parts. And that's why tasks are usually the first thing that comes out when we're doing brain dumps.
Can I ask you to just go back one quick second so I can put it in the chat?
Sure.
What were the questions in the second dump? What do I want more of in my life? What are my goals and priorities?
Yeah, so what do I want more in my life? What do I want to put energy and focus into?
Okay.
And I will point out that I did a very broad brain dump. If I'm working with someone, I actually would do this individually. Like, what do I want more academically, right? Or in terms of my training and certificate and exposure. And then you could do a brain dump on what do I want professionally. We just kind of group this together just to allow a very wide audience to contribute and participate.
Somebody said they love crossing things off of their to-do list. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what the brain dump allows them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm somebody who loves to cross things off too. I will point out though, if you're somebody who likes to cross things off, like I'm somebody who can create wonderful, beautiful spreadsheets and create a task list. But what happens is if you go back to the model, let's go back to the model again. What happens is I go to the brain dump and I go right to tasks identified to accomplish, but I don't do the organizing and the prioritizing. And that's really important for someone like me, which is true for many of you. I manage multiple projects, right? I'm also a student. And so you have to make sure you're doing these 2 steps as well in between, right?
My first brain dump was scattered and unorganized, like I was venting to myself. The second was tailored, more focused. However, I had more to dump on the second activity. My main focus overlapped for both activities.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got to read this one. On my second brain dump, I realized I just need to hire a maid.
Hey, great epiphanies come with brain dumps. I just want to point this out. So I hope what's happening in the responses and what you're seeing is that one, brain dump is not just a task list, right? Most often your first brain dump will probably be a task list. So push yourself further. Do another brain dump. Do a focused brain dump, right? I want to see if there's any other questions related to the brain dump or mind dump.
Let's see. Do you have any advice on overcoming procrastination on a task you know you need to do? Just don't desire to do it at all.
Oh, yeah.
How do you not take that possum stance?
Yeah.
Sorry, usually
no,
take a nap.
Thank you for coming back to the possum.
But that aids to procrastination. Yes, the nap.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I just want to say this. It's something that I'm also reminded by my own support network is that I am also a procrastinator when it comes to things that I am uncomfortable with, scared about, have some kind of fear with it. Maybe I'm doubting myself. I've come to understand that about myself through this kind of work, right? And I think acknowledgement of what is stopping you is the first place to begin. So you got to begin with the awareness and mindfulness. I think I have a huge, broad support network. And so I encourage you to have it with your thought partner, whoever that might be as well, because you want to be able to unpack some of that if you can, right? And these next slides are going to talk about how you get moving. So I'm going to answer some of that questions in particular, right?
Okay, I think I'm done.
Okay, so here is the reflection process, but we can keep going through here. Post brain dump steps, we talked a little bit about. You don't want to forget to start. First, the number one should really be, do you have more to dump? That should be number one, actually. Do you have more to dump? Then you move into the group and categorizing, identifying what are actually goals and prioritizing, right? And then you're thinking about the steps and tasks. See, steps and tasks are like number 5 in the process. Many of us begin here, right? And then you don't want to forget about setting your intentions, right? Intentions meaning how will you commit to the stuff that you're putting down as being a priority or a goal? And then keeping track, making visible your progress, and then not forgetting to celebrate your progress along the way. You're hearing a little bit of the SMART goal setting language in here. I just want to point that out. So I'm going to move through these 2 slides because of time, but this is where I want to get to. How do you get moving and organized, right? For those of you who are thinking about procrastination too, I'm going to talk about this. So here, I think this quote is really helpful to really think about as we think about moving and getting organized. Without a plan, a goal is simply a wish, right? Any reactions to the quote, please feel free to put it into the chat box. So how do you get moving? And this I want to credit to Morgan Williams because she was so good at creating the slide because we got this question, right? The majority of people who come to a workshop like this is that they're trying to add more strategies into what they already have, or they're stuck. And I can understand being stuck, right? The possum, the turtle over here. So one of the major things I have to constantly work on is that I cannot wait for motivation. I have to cultivate discipline, right? Sorry, give me 1 second. You want to utilize sorry, Paul, let me go back to number one. For my dissertation, the part in which I was most stuck and could not move and I was being a possum, if I had waited for motivation to come along, I would never be at the stage where I'm at right now, 5 years later, where I'm actually submitting my final revisions. It was something I had to understand myself. So I think it's a very hard statement to say, so I apologize, but I really want to tap this into, and we're going to refer back to this on the next slide when I talk about thinking of yourself like an athlete, and we'll come back to this, okay? In terms of reconditioning yourself, right, into the things that you want to do. So I'm going to come back to this in a second. You want to utilize your awareness and movement. Use pulse checks, right? Here are several different strategies that I utilize to quickly get my awareness and mindfulness, right? And so I use the pulse check. We've talked a little bit about that. A dance party. So I'm somebody who actually responds a lot to music. Is there anybody else who responds to music out there? I hope there's some yeses over there. I encourage you to play a song in the start of your day that gets you moving, that gets you focused. For me, it's always James Brown right now. I'm not going to lie, right? So I do a little dance party with myself. The warrior or superhero pose is really a great mindfulness and awareness strategy where if you, something particularly for things that are challenging for me before I embark on that actual task or brain dump, if it's challenging for me, I will stand like this with my hands on my hip as if I'm conquering something as I'm doing my breathing, right? And then deep breathing with a focus statement, which we talked about, affirmations. And so the affirmation that I offered you all was, what would I accomplish if I knew I could not fail? Or what would I do if I knew I could not fail? That's been a major thing for me the last 2 years. That's been my affirmation that I've repeated. I encourage you to find others that motivate you as well. Start off small. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I love that. Somebody else said, I use the superhero pose before interviews.
Yes, yes, yes. That's perfect. Yes. And again, I want to point out what we're doing here. We are taking ownership of our energy. We are taking ownership of our awareness and our presence. That's pretty phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this is what I have to say, because Morgan loves saying, Morgan Williams, who helped develop this. She talks about SOS, start off small. And we're going to talk about this when I introduce the Pomodoro technique, because this is one very effective way. If you are stuck and you do not want to do something, we're going to talk about the Pomodoro technique as an opportunity for you to move forward on something like that. Organize yourself. Organize yourself. Organize for yourself and not for others. Took me a minute to say that. Organize for yourself and not for others. Now, I say this keeping in mind that we're not talking about necessarily working in groups or teams. We're talking more about ourselves and goal setting and planning. Track your progress. As somebody who mentioned who likes to check off lists, this is an important part of that, is being able to see what you've done and when you've arrived at an actual goal, right? And then share your goals with others. You want to bring people in to be supportive of you, to be thinking partners, to be motivating of you. When I am most fearful of my goals and the things that I desire, I don't share them with other people. And through mindfulness, I've learned that. And I've learned to kind of be braver about sharing things that I want. Any questions? We're going to continue this conversation on the next slide. Okay, so start off small.
Sorry, I'm slow. Do you have a weekly cycle?
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
A
Oh,
weekly-
I think we're talking music. Never mind. Continue.
Okay. So start off small. What does that mean? And this is what we talked about before. You know, if you are changing a behavior or a thought pattern, that's a lot of work. And I want to commend everyone who is here trying to do that. You are going to feel resistance, I want to tell you, right? That's why having a coach, an advisor, someone who can be your thought partner, right, is going to be so important. But this is where I tried, and I'm not an athlete, but I sure do think of myself as somebody who really loves physical activity, right? Now, when you're thinking about changing a behavior or starting something new, you want to put into your mind that you're an athlete, reconditioning yourself to be disciplined, right? Just like all athletes have to do to physically test themselves, you are doing the same thing, but cognitively and spiritually. And so I often think of myself even putting on my writing gear. I have a certain sweater that I wear. That's my writing sweater, in all honesty. But you want to think of and channel that persona, right? You want to remember that only you can prioritize what's important, right? And not everything is important at the very moment. And that's one thing I'm still learning how to come back to. And through mindfulness, I'm able to regroup myself at the start of the day. Or sometimes I have to do mindfulness checks and pulse checks throughout the day, multiple times, to help me with this, right? With prioritizing. Keep your tasks organized and small so it's easy to start, right? You want to break down the tasks that you have to the smallest tasks that you can imagine so that you're setting yourself up for success, right? And I would say that breaking down tasks is something that I think an advisor, a counselor, or coach can help you with, right? Set a timer for a specific amount of time, specifically a short amount of time, and start your work. And I'm going to talk more about this because this is exactly what the Pomodoro technique is. But last, I want to mention, you want to do a pulse check on your current energy level and availability. And when I say availability, I'm really talking about like your own kind of energy level, really. Like, how available are you in terms of giving your presence, right? And this is where we're going back to being honest and realistic with ourselves, which leads to more well-being, right? What is your energy level at? And what is your presence? What can you offer, right?
So Glory B, here's a question. You have a, what's the word they're looking for? Routine that you do every week, at the beginning of the week for this, and then at the end of the week, something like this.
Oh, are you asking me if there's a routine that you could do during the week that incorporates this?
Yeah, or they actually want to know if you have one.
Oh, so yes, I do. I have brain dumps scheduled in my calendar Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Even though I do brain dumps probably throughout the week, I have them scheduled on my calendar because I know that at the start of the week, of course, I need something. At the end of the week, I need to look forward to the following week. And the middle one is just because I need time to regroup. My energy level is usually low by the time Wednesday comes after everything that I've experienced. So for me, that's one major thing I tend to do on my schedule, is that I schedule brain dumps actively on my calendar.
And then, so for people who are feeling overwhelmed by this, when you do your brain dump, is there a way that you can pick one thing that's overwhelming and then do a brain dump around that one thing?
Yes, that's exactly it. Thank you, Mary Jo.
Okay.
Yes. So break it down as small as you can, especially when things are anxiety provoking or stressful, right? You want to break it down as small as you can and then begin your brain dump there. So what I didn't mention as well is that whole, if you think about this figure, and this is how I coach, and this is what I do, is that I have time for brain dumping, but I know if I brain dump, I'm going to need time to do these things as well, right? So I put those in my calendar, right? One of the things that I realized about myself is that I'm really good at brain dumping. I'm really good at organizing and documenting when I make time to do it, right? What I am not good at is prioritizing and identifying my effort level. These two things I'm not good at. So I have to purposely make time to do it, right? Because I will skip it. So as you're thinking about kind of like a weekly schedule, I would incorporate all these things in there, right? All these steps. Did I answer? Was there any other questions? Sorry, I'm going through these slides very quickly. Okay. Let's talk about the Pomodoro technique, because we actually did this today. It's setting a short amount of time and working in small blocks. And we did that today when we did the brain dump, where I timed everyone, right? So the Pomodoro technique was actually developed in the 1980s. It was used specifically for college students. Pomodoro means tomato in Italian, which is how, if you see the little icon, it's a little tomato timer. The whole premise of the Pomodoro technique is to work in short intervals, take short and regular timed breaks, right? And so when I actually work in Pomodoros in my life, everything is always set to 25 minutes. And part of this is because this is based on cognitive psychology and in terms of attention span and what we actually can focus our time on, right? And so this, I think, does go back to what are you actually doing, right? And being really clear about what tasks you're working on and how much effort it does require you to do, right? So here's an overview of the Pomodoro technique. Is there anybody who's familiar with the Pomodoro technique? Please put that in the Q&A if you are. And if you have any experience, whether it worked for you or not, we'd love to hear that. There's a nice short video underneath here you're welcome to take a look at when you get the slides as well.
So we have one person who says, one person says they used it all through school. Actually, two people used it all through college.
Yeah. Nice.
And somebody else said they learned the Pomodoro technique on a Coursera to help study.
Yeah. Yep. So I would say you're going to see it in most skill building workshops for students. It's the Pomodoro technique all the way. But I think this is used for everyday use. It can use for your professional settings, your academic settings, right? It's really, to me, about getting started, right? Especially if you link it with a mindfulness approach, right? So before you start to identify your tasks for the day, you've done your brain dump. You've organized your brain dump, right? You've thought about your priorities, right? And then you jump into the Pomodoro technique, which is where you're going to do one specific task or tasks. You set your timer for 25 minutes. You work on that task as much as you can. You stay focused on that task until the timer is over. Now, I want to point out, all of us, our minds are going to continue to wander. You're going to have distractions, but the goal of the Pomodoro technique is to put those distractions on the side. Keep a paper, a pen, something where you can put those distractions over there and you can come back to the task at hand. So to me, the Pomodoro technique teaches you to focus your presence.
Oh, sorry, I'm still reading things. I've gotten into the habit of working through my lunch, taking no breaks throughout the day. So yeah. I am so excited to try this. Yeah, what do you think about that, Glory B? Because our meetings are scheduled for 1 hour, right?
Yeah.
And we go from thing to thing to thing to thing. So how would this Pomodoro technique work within work?
Yes. So this is where I think some of us have more control over meetings and some don't. So I will be honest, when I'm controlling meetings, like I'm the supervisor, I'm working with my team, I will try really hard to give breaks in between. So if not every 30 minutes, every 45 minutes, like we did today, eyeball breaks and stuff, because you're trying to not only teach others how to do this, but you're trying to also give yourself time to shift between things cognitively, right? So I want to point out that some of us don't have control over that, but I do encourage you in a format that we have today where we have virtual settings and we can turn our video cameras on and off. I encourage you to utilize those things. I often turn my camera off after 45 minutes or 40 minutes, and I tell people I'm taking a quick eyeball break, and I will get up and put my hand above my head so that I can get my blood moving around, right? I invite others who want to comment, Mary Jo or Lisa.
Well, we have less than 15 minutes, right?
Yes, we do.
And you know, I'm sitting here trying to read all the comments, so y'all can comment away. Don't get upset if I don't read your specific comment. Okay.
No, I appreciate it, Mary Jo. Thank you. We're doing our best with this format. So the key to the Pomodoro technique, for those of you who did it as students, I encourage you to come back and utilize it as a strategy for yourself, right? However way that you can incorporate it into your day, right? The other thing I want to point out is that for the Pomodoro technique, the key is the 5-minute break. You have to step away from the task you were working on. And I encourage you to step away from the computer if you can. They really encourage you to do that in terms of really being maximizing this technique, is you want to get up, physically move away from what you are doing, right? Now, I want to say why this is so important. This is so important because the majority of us want to be creative. We want to be innovative in our work, in our academic settings. We want to be loving and caring in our family settings. In order to make those shifts, you have to give yourself time to transition, right? And you have to give yourself time to go through the day in a healthy way, right? Where you have mental breaks, where you can have your lunch and you're not looking at the screen. And I say that as somebody who is still trying to enact all of these strategies on a regular basis. Some weeks I get it right. Some months I get it right. And some weeks and some months I don't. But that's okay. Because like I said, trying is an action word. And that's all you need to keep moving forward. So I celebrate trying all the time.
So when using the Pomodoro technique, if you're on a roll, experiencing great flow, do you still stop and take a break? And if you do, how do you manage that fear of losing your place, losing your flow?
Thank you. It's such a great question. Especially people who do writing, like maybe who's writing stuff, you have to fight the desire to want to keep working. The benefit of this technique is stopping and giving your brain a release. And I say that as somebody who writes. That's a really tough thing to do when I'm on a flow and I do not want to stop. But I promise you, your creativity and your innovation will be better and greater if you do this. Now, if you are in a flow and you do not want to forget something, put a place marker there. Put something in bold or yellow and say, I stopped here and this is what I was thinking, and then leave it alone and walk away. That's the strategy that I utilize. Leave a placeholder for yourself. Let me show you this next slide. People tend to find this really helpful. I tend to think in Pomodoros as well, and most of the students that I work with and staff also do too, right? If you think about a Pomodoro technique throughout the whole day, this is what it would look like. You would have 4 Pomodoro techniques, and after each Pomodoro, which is 25 minutes, there's a 5-minute break. You work for 25 minutes. There's a 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes. And then after your 4th Pomodoro, you take a full 20-minute, they say coffee break, but you can do any kind of a break here. Be a stretching break, a yoga break, anything like that. And then you would continue that process again. 4 Pomodoros, each with a 5-minute break afterwards, and then you take a longer break if you want during the lunchtime, but you need at least a 20-minute break here. And you do it again. I'll give you guys a minute to take a look at that. This day, if you think about the Pomodoro technique, many of us do not even take 3 breaks in a day, right? When you're working. So for some of you, this is going to be transformative in terms of how you're changing your work schedule. But I do promise you, if you're looking for innovation, if you're looking to be more creative, if you're looking to have more of a balance and feel healthier and don't feel so run down by the end of your day, enacting techniques like this will help. Here's another slide we have when you can think about Pomodoro. This is actually how I write my Pomodoros out. I write it by the task after I've done my brain dump and I've organized and I know what tasks I'm working on. This is how I move to thinking about effort level. So remember that last list or icon on the figure, it was specifying effort level. This is one thing I do not do well. I'm still learning how long it takes me to do certain things. This identifies the tasks by the number of Pomodoros that you will need. So talk about learning about yourself more, right? I see that Mary Jo unmuted herself. Any questions?
Yeah. Are there any phone apps or websites you recommend to help you with the Pomodoro technique?
Oh, yes. There are several of them, and that's leading to, thank you so much. We have like a list of like 6 different slides at the end of this slide deck that has a whole bunch of like technology applications that you can use, both free and some that cost a certain amount of money to help with organizing and organizing yourself. So we'll be sure to share those out with you as well. The one I'm thinking of that's closest to the Pomodoro technique is the Forest application. This is where you actually can set your timer to work. And after each Pomodoro or timed work, you actually grow a piece of a tree. It's kind of awesome. And at the end of the day, you would have a full tree grown. Students really, really love this application. And it's called the Forest app. And it is linked in our slides. Okay, I know we're wrapping up and we're at the end of the slides, I promise. So I'm leading all of this to say, how do you get moving? How do you start planning? You gotta think about your organizational system, right? You gotta think about how are you organizing your brain dumps? How are you organizing the steps that come after the brain dump, right? And so I encourage you, if you haven't thought about this, to consider a system that's multi-method and that has multiple strategies that work for you at this moment in time. So now we're coming back to this mindfulness. My system that I started with when I entered my PhD program and I was working part-time is not the system that worked for me once I was working on my dissertation and working full-time. I had to change it, right? And I had to utilize other strategies. You want to also consider your needs and wants around online versus computer-based, visual tools versus hard copy or paper copy. All of them are at your disposal. We're at a place in time where there's so much available to us in terms of keeping ourselves organized, but you just want to figure out what works best for you. There are a lot of people who travel, so having something electronic to look at while you're traveling is so beneficial, right? But you're not limited to that. Last and foremost, be flexible with yourself. Allow yourself to grow. And as you're growing, so should your organizational system. Okay, let's look at, I believe the next slides are all the resources that I mentioned. So I want to credit Morgan Williams, Lavasha, Mundy, who was our former CW staff who helped create this list. There is a series of things on here for organizing and your focus. I'm going to go through the slides a little bit quickly, but please tell me if you want me to stop. Here's the productivity one. So the Forest app was the one that I was referring to before. It's right here. That's a little bit more aligned with the Pomodoro technique, and you can work in timed ones. And I believe that one is free. Mind mapping. So this is where I'm encouraging people to really think about how to visually demonstrate their goals and desires. You're not limited to doing things linearly at all, right? And so feel comfortable to visually represent this either through your whiteboard, or there are other applications that you can use to do something like this. I really love mind mapping. I'm somebody who does need to be unrestricted when I'm dumping stuff, right? So I want to give you a visual representation of what a mind map is. Here's another one. So here are the links that are available for you in your mind map. I will point out that Miro is a free one, and it's relatively easy to use if you're just starting off with mind mapping. We ran a workshop on Miro before. All right. So we are wrapping up now. Please, if there are any questions you still have, put them in the chat box, and I'll look to see if Mary Jo has unmuted herself. Takeaway messages. Tap into your energy efficient superpower that you all have, right? And I want to point out again, because this leads to my journey and what I believe might be some of your journeys, we can't control everything. We are working within systems that have their own histories, and they have their own cultures and climate, and some of us have no control over that. We are experiencing it. What we have control over is our response, whether we react or whether we respond, right, to these situations, and how we prioritize our goals and our desires in this time, right? Always begin with a pulse check and a brain dump, right? Pulse check and brain dump. Remember SOS, start off small, right? Think of the Pomodoro technique. You can do anything for like 15 minutes. And I said 25 minutes, but I encourage you, if there's something that you're avoiding, don't even start with 25 minutes, start with 15, right? Start with 15 minutes, because by the end of that 15 minutes, you will have done more then in those 15 minutes than you probably did a few weeks ago, right? Create your organizational system for you right now, right? Give yourself grace, always. Trying counts, right? Showing up today counts. On a Friday at the last workshop, that counts. Find your thought partner. Find someone that you can talk to about the things that you're thinking about, or you're dreaming about, and want to set in motion, right? Post-workshop, I want to encourage you to reach out to the task force network. Give the executive team feedback. Tell them that you want to do a follow-up part 2 on this workshop, which I am working on creating. Connect with other members who have similar goals and priorities. Mary Jo, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, before you finish, there's one question I think everybody would benefit the answer from. Any tips for using the Pomodoro technique in the workplace when interruptions are frequent? Work in a 2-person office, and I'm often delegated urgent tasks at odd times throughout the day, even if I have set aside time to work on something else.
Yeah, that's a great question. Ooh. I think that's a great question that we as a task force should think about in the next workshop, Mary Jo. So I want to make sure we get
so.
Down.
Yeah, I think so too. Hey, anonymous attendee, my email address is Mary Jo G, and anybody else. Mary Jo G, go ahead. Oh, wait, don't write that down. I mean, you can, but don't use it. Why don't you use the WCTF dash FAQ email? That way, everybody on the exec team gets it. So if you have questions about this workshop or anything else from today, send it to the task force FAQ email, and then we'll get back to you.
Yes. Thank you. My initial reaction, though, because I'm only saying that because I have lots of ideas, but my initial reaction to answer your question is don't do 25 minutes, start off with something shorter. So if you can control 10 or 15 minutes of your time, and you can indicate that on your calendar, or if you have office space, or tell your office mate that you're doing a brain dump and you need to stay focused for 15 minutes, try doing smaller amount of time. I promise you'll still get a lot out of 15 minutes versus 25. I'm a guru for 5-minute brain dumps, just so you know, too. Okay.
Glory, everybody thanks you so much for this workshop. I want to thank you for the workshop, even though I couldn't engage as much as I wanted to because
you were doing all the questions.
I was doing the questions, but I needed this. I needed this stuff, people. So thank you very much. Everyone will get the slides, and a copy of the presentation. When they're made available, you get an email. Please do fill out the conference, evaluation when it comes to you, again, in your email. And now follow the link that you were sent earlier to get to the closing session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.